"Leave this house in 1 hour," my daughter-in-law, Amanda, said with a voice as brittle and cold as a winter morning in Chicago. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, a defensive posture that barely contained the nervous energy humming beneath her skin. She was visibly tense, as if that order was the final, desperate move in a game I didn't even know we were playing. I just smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, nor a malicious one. It was a shield, a thin veil of composure I pulled over the chaos erupting inside me. The house where we stood, this 2-story colonial in a quiet Illinois suburb, wasn't just wood and plaster to me. It was a sanctuary my late husband Tom and I had built, a vessel that held 50 years of my life. Every scuff on the hardwood floor, every faint pencil mark on the doorframe tracking our son David's height, was a paragraph in my story. Leaving here wouldn't be simple. For Amanda, it was a necessary amputation. For me, it felt like being asked to leave my own skin behind. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment with the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." Over the years since Tom passed and David married Amanda, this house had become a silent observer of a new kind of history. I had witnessed the subtle shifts in my son, the way Amanda's sharp edges slowly chipped away at his gentle nature. I saw the secrets they whispered when they thought I was asleep, the strained finances hidden behind glossy social media posts. This house held more than just my memories with Tom. It held the uncomfortable truths of my son's marriage. Amanda saw my presence as a judgment, a constant reminder of a past she couldn't control. But she didn't understand that I wasn't judging. I was just watching and grieving for more than just my husband. That smile was my only weapon. It was a promise to myself that this wasn't an end. Behind the placid expression, a storm was gathering. The shock was beginning to recede, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. She had given me an hour to pack up a life, an hour to become homeless, an hour that would sever the last frayed thread connecting me to the family I thought I had. But as I held her gaze, my smile unwavering, I knew this hour would change everything, and perhaps not in the way she so desperately hoped. It would be my rebirth, my challenge, and my quiet, patient revenge. I turned without a word and walked toward the master bedroom, my bedroom, the one I had shared with Tom for 45 years. The familiar scent of lavender and old books wrapped around me like a comforting hug, and for a moment my composure threatened to crack. Amanda's voice followed me, sharp and impatient. "1 hour, Helen. I'm setting a timer. I want you and your things out." I didn't acknowledge her. The timer was irrelevant. What could I possibly pack in an hour that could represent a lifetime? My eyes scanned the room. The heavy oak furniture Tom had picked out, the quilt on the bed that my grandmother had made, the silver-framed photos on the nightstand, Tom and me on our wedding day, his arm slung protectively around my shoulder, David as a gap-toothed 7-year-old, proudly holding up a string of fish. I walked over and picked up the photo of David. His innocent, joyful face was a painful counterpoint to the strained, weary man he had become. I gently slipped the photo out of its frame and tucked it into my purse. Then, I took the one of Tom and me. The rest could stay. They were just things. The memories were mine to keep. My movements became methodical, detached. I pulled a small suitcase from the top of the closet, the one I used for weekend trips. What does one pack for an indefinite journey into nothingness? I chose practical clothes, a few pairs of slacks, warm sweaters, sensible shoes. I bypassed the dresses and jewelry, relics of a different life, a life where I was a wife, a hostess, a matriarch. That woman was being evicted. A new one I hadn't met yet, would have to build her own wardrobe. My hands paused over my jewelry box. Inside, nestled amongst other pieces, was my grandmother's locket. It wasn't valuable in terms of money, but it held tiny faded portraits of her own parents. It was a legacy of resilience passed down through generations of women in my family. I clasped it around my neck. Its cool metal against my skin felt like an anchor. I went into the bathroom and gathered my toiletries, my heart medication, the essentials of survival. I was moving as if in a dream, my mind working on two separate tracks. One was focused on the practical task of packing, the other was racing, trying to process the why. Why now? Why so brutally? David wasn't home. Of course he wasn't. Amanda had chosen her moment perfectly. She had always resented my relationship with David, the easy way we could talk for hours, the shared history that she could never be a part of. She saw me as a rival for his affection, for his loyalty. But this was more than jealousy. This was surgical. This was planned. As I zipped the suitcase, my eyes fell on the old roll-top desk in the corner of the room. Tom's desk. After he died, I never had the heart to fully clean it out. It was still filled with his papers, his meticulous records, his life's work as an accountant. Amanda had always hated that desk. "It's a dusty old antique, Helen. It takes up so much space," she'd say. I knew she wanted to replace it with something sleek and modern, something without history. On a sudden impulse, I walked over to it. I ran my hand over the worn wood, and then, using a key I kept hidden, I unlocked the deep bottom drawer. It was where Tom kept the most important documents: the deed to the house, our wills, old tax returns. My fingers brushed against a thick manila envelope I hadn't seen in years. It was labeled simply, "For Helen," in case. My heart skipped a beat. Tom was always a planner, a man who believed in contingencies. I hesitated for only a second before sliding the envelope into my large purse, hidden beneath my wallet and the photo of David. I had 10 minutes left when I walked back into the living room, my small suitcase in one hand, my purse slung over my shoulder. Amanda was standing by the front door, tapping her foot, her phone in her hand. She looked up, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. Perhaps she expected tears, pleading, a dramatic scene. My calm defiance seemed to unsettle her. "Is that all?" she asked, gesturing to my single bag with a dismissive flick of her wrist. "Everything I need," I replied, my voice even. The air was thick with unspoken words, with years of resentment and perceived slights. I could see the story she was telling herself. She was the wronged wife, finally standing up to the overbearing mother-in-law who wouldn't let go. She had no idea how wrong she was. I had given them space. After Tom died, I offered to sell the house and move into a smaller condo, but it was David who had begged me to stay. "It won't be the same without you here, Mom," he'd said. "Amanda and I can move in, help you with the upkeep. We'll be a family." It seemed like a perfect solution at the time, a way to keep the house in the family and not be alone. I had even agreed to sign the house over to them legally, with the notarized stipulation that I had the right to live here for the rest of my life, a life estate. Tom had insisted on it when we'd planned our wills. It seemed Amanda had either forgotten or chosen to ignore that crucial detail. I walked toward the door, my steps feeling strangely light. As I passed her, I stopped. I looked her directly in the eye, and for the first time since this ordeal began, I let my smile fade. "You know, Amanda," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "Tom always said this house had strong foundations. He built it to withstand anything, storms, time, even betrayal." Her face paled slightly. The confidence she had worn like armor began to show a few cracks. She hadn't expected me to speak. She had expected me to crumble. I didn't wait for a reply. I opened the front door, stepped out into the crisp autumn air, and closed it gently behind me. I didn't look back. The timer inside had probably just gone off, but it didn't matter. My hour was up. A new clock had just started ticking. The cold air hit me like a physical blow, snapping me out of the daze that had carried me through the last hour. I stood on the sidewalk, my small suitcase, a pathetic testament to my new reality. My car, a reliable 10-year-old sedan, was parked at the curb. For a moment, I just stared at the house. My house. The windows stared back like vacant eyes. Lights were on inside, a cheerful, welcoming glow that felt like a mockery. I imagined Amanda inside, pacing, maybe pouring herself a celebratory glass of wine, relieved that the old woman was finally gone. A wave of anger, hot and sharp, surged through me, so intense it made me dizzy. How could David let this happen? Where was my son? I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I scrolled to his name. I typed a simple message. Amanda just kicked me out of the house. I have 1 hour to leave. Where are you? I hit send and waited. 1 minute passed, then 5. The delivered status under my message remained unchanged. No read receipt. He was ignoring my call, or Amanda had his phone. The thought sent a fresh chill down my spine. They were in this together. The betrayal wasn't just Amanda's, it was my son's too. That hurt more than losing the house. I opened my car door and slid into the driver's seat. The familiar interior offered little comfort. Where was I supposed to go? I had friends, of course, but it was late afternoon on a Tuesday. Showing up on someone's doorstep with a suitcase and a story of being evicted by your daughter-in-law felt like an unbearable imposition. My pride, already in tatters, wouldn't allow it. I needed a moment to think, to breathe. I started the car and just drove, with no destination in mind. The quiet suburban streets, lined with manicured lawns and cozy-looking homes, blurred past my window. Each house represented a life, a family, a sense of belonging that had just been ripped away from me. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, a beautiful sunset for the ugliest day of my life. I found myself pulling into the parking lot of a public library a few towns over. It felt like a neutral space, a place of quiet anonymity. I sat in my car for a long time, the engine off, the silence inside, amplifying the frantic thoughts in my head. My savings were modest. Tom's life insurance had been substantial, but I'd used a large portion of it over the years, mostly to help David. A down payment for his first car, a significant loan to help him and Amanda start a business that quietly failed. I had paid for their lavish wedding. I had propped up their lifestyle, a lifestyle they clearly couldn't afford. For years, the realization landed with a thud in the pit of my stomach. I hadn't just been a mother-in-law living in their house, I had been a resource. And now, I supposed, the resource had run dry. Hunger gnawed at me. I hadn't eaten since breakfast. I drove to a nearby diner, the kind with vinyl booths, and a menu that hadn't changed in decades. I slid into a booth in the corner, placing my suitcase on the seat opposite me, as if it were a dining companion. The waitress, a woman about my age, with tired eyes and a kind smile, took my order for coffee and a grilled cheese sandwich. As I waited, I pulled the thick manila envelope from my purse. For Helen, in case. Tom's handwriting was as familiar as my own. My hands trembled as I opened the unsealed flap. Inside were several documents, held together by a paperclip. On top was a short handwritten letter. "My dearest Helen," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you are facing a storm I hoped you would never have to weather alone. I know David is a good man, but I also know he can be easily influenced. Love can make us blind. I have always had a feeling that Amanda's ambitions might one day outweigh her affections. I have taken some precautions. I want you to be protected, always. The documents in this envelope are your shield. Use them wisely. Know that my greatest regret is leaving you to face the world without me. All my love, Tom." Tears I had refused to shed in front of Amanda now streamed freely down my face, dripping onto the worn Formica tabletop. They were tears of grief for my husband, for the love we shared, and tears of gratitude for his foresight, his unwavering need to protect me, even from beyond the grave. Beneath the letter were the documents. The first was a copy of the life estate agreement I had signed, the one giving me the right to live in the house. It was notarized and legally binding. The second document was a detailed financial statement, a ledger Tom had kept. It meticulously tracked every dollar I had given to David and Amanda over the past decade. The car, the wedding, the failed business venture, even large sums for home renovations that seemed to result in new cars and expensive vacations for them. but not a single improvement to the house itself. The total was staggering. It was far more than I had realized, a sum that could have provided me with a comfortable retirement. The third and final document was the most surprising. It was a copy of the original deed to the house, but attached to it was a private mortgage agreement, drawn up by Tom's lawyer a year before he passed. It seemed Tom had given them a loan against the house's equity, the one he had signed over to them, and the terms stated that if they ever defaulted on their primary mortgage or attempted to sell or otherwise force the other party, me, from the property, the full amount of his loan would become immediately due, and his loan wasn't to his estate. He had structured it so the debt would be owed directly to me. He had seen this coming. He had laid a perfect legal trap, and Amanda, in her arrogant haste, had just walked right into it. The grilled cheese arrived, but I had lost my appetite. I paid the bill, leaving a generous tip for the kind-eyed waitress, and walked back to my car, the papers clutched in my hand. It was no longer a shield, it was a sword. Now, I'm curious about you, who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. The first night, I stayed in a cheap motel off the highway. The room was clean but smelled faintly of stale smoke and disinfectant. Sleep was impossible. My mind raced, replaying the confrontation with Amanda, my son's silence, the words in Tom's letter. I felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. I was 68 years old, effectively homeless, but I was also armed with a truth so powerful it could shatter my son's life. The next morning, I knew I couldn't drift aimlessly any longer. I needed a plan. My first call was not to a lawyer, but to my oldest friend, Margaret. We had known each other since kindergarten. She was a no-nonsense, fiercely loyal woman who had seen me through every major event in my life. I called her, my voice shaking slightly as I recounted the events of the previous day. She listened without interruption, a series of quiet ahas, the only sign she was there. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then she said, "That little witch. Okay, Helen, here's what you're not going to do. You're not going to stay in that Fleabag motel for one more night. I have a spare room. It's yours for as long as you need it. I'll text you the address. Get over here now." Tears of relief pricked my eyes. "Margaret, I can't impose." "Shut up, Helen," she said, her voice firm but warm. "You are not imposing. You are my friend. Now get in your car." Margaret lived in a small, tidy bungalow about an hour away, in a town I hadn't visited in years. Walking into her home was like stepping into a warm bath. It was filled with color, mismatched furniture, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. She enfolded me in a fierce hug that squeezed the breath out of me, and for the first time in 24 hours, I felt safe. We sat at her kitchen table for hours, drinking coffee while I showed her Tom's documents. She read them over carefully, her expression growing more grim with each page. "Good Lord, Helen," she breathed, looking at the ledger of payments. "You financed their entire life." When she read the mortgage agreement Tom had set up, a slow, wolfish grin spread across her face. "That magnificent man," she said. "Tom always was 10 steps ahead of everyone else. So what's your next move, counselor?" The question hung in the air. What was my next move? My first instinct was to call a lawyer, file an injunction, and force my way back into my house, but the thought of it left a sour taste in my mouth. Did I really want to go back? To live under the same roof with the woman who had so cruelly cast me out, and with the son who had stood by and let it happen? The house was no longer a sanctuary, it was a battleground. "I don't think I want to go back," I said, the words surprising me as they came out. "Even if I win, I lose. It will be miserable." Margaret nodded slowly, understanding. "So this isn't about getting the house back, it's about getting your life back, and your money." She was right. The house was a symbol, but the real issue was the years of manipulation and financial exploitation. They hadn't just taken my home, they had taken my security. For the next few days, Margaret's home became my command center. With her help, I began to untangle the mess my life had become. We found a lawyer, a sharp woman named Miss Davis, who specialized in elder law and real estate disputes. I sat in her sterile, quiet office and told her the whole story, laying out Tom's documents on her polished mahogany desk. She examined them with a forensic intensity. Her eyes lit up when she saw the life estate agreement and the private mortgage. "Mrs. Miller," she said, her voice crisp and professional, "your husband was an exceptionally prudent man. This is airtight. Amanda and David have not only violated the life estate clause, which is grounds for you to sue for immediate reinstatement and damages, but by forcing you out, they have triggered the acceleration clause on this private mortgage. According to this, they owe you, let me see, $275,000. Immediately, the number seemed impossibly large. I had known I'd given them a lot, but seeing it quantified by a lawyer made it real. It was a fortune they had squandered. "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "We have a few options," Miss Davis explained. "We can send them a demand letter. We outline their breach of contract, state our legal position, and demand you be allowed back in the house. Or," she paused, leaning forward slightly, "we can bypass that. We can place a lien on the property for the full amount of the private mortgage they now owe you. Given the amount detailed in your husband's ledger, which establishes a clear pattern of financial dependency, we can also petition the court to freeze their assets pending a full financial investigation. They won't be able to sell the house, refinance it, or even access their bank accounts without a court order." It was an aggressive, ruthless strategy. It was a declaration of war. A few weeks ago, I would have recoiled at the idea, but I wasn't the same woman I was a few weeks ago. That woman had tried to keep the peace, to smooth things over, to buy her son's happiness. This new woman, forged in the fire of betrayal, wanted justice. "Let's do it," I said, my voice clear and steady. "Let's freeze everything." While Miss Davis and her team prepared the legal assault, I started taking small steps to rebuild my own life. Margaret was a godsend, giving me space when I needed it, and encouragement when I faltered. "You can't just sit around here waiting for the legal hammer to fall," she told me one morning. "You need to get out, do something for yourself." On her urging, I started volunteering at the local library, the same one I'd parked at on that first terrible night. It was just a few hours a week, reshelving books and helping people with the computers. It didn't pay anything, but it gave me a sense of purpose, a reason to get up in the morning. I was surrounded by books, by quiet, by people who didn't know my story, who just saw me as Helen, the helpful library volunteer. I started talking to people, making new acquaintances. I joined a book club, a senior yoga class. Slowly, tentatively, a new life began to sprout in the rubble of the old one. One afternoon, while shelving books in the biography section, my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Mom, it's David. I know you're angry. I can explain everything. Amanda told me you decided to leave, that you were unhappy. I didn't know she kicked you out. Please, can we talk?" The message was a cocktail of lies and half-truths, so transparent it was almost insulting. He didn't know. How could he not know? I had texted him from the curb as I was leaving. I stared at the message for a long time, the old maternal instinct to forgive, to understand, warring with the cold, hard anger that had become my companion. He was weak. He was a coward, hiding behind his wife's lies. He was trying to rewrite history, to absolve himself of his complicity. I thought about what to write back. A torrent of angry accusations, a simple cutting refusal. In the end, I typed a response that was calm, detached and final. "David, there is nothing to talk about. My lawyer will be in contact with you and Amanda soon." I blocked his number. Cutting off my own son was the hardest thing I had ever had to do, but I knew it was necessary. The old Helen would have rushed to meet him, desperate for a reconciliation. The new Helen was building a future, and that future couldn't have a foundation of lies and weakness. The next day, Miss Davis called. "The lien is in place," she said, a note of satisfaction in her voice, "and the motion to freeze their assets was granted this morning. They probably just found out their credit cards are being declined." The silent revenge I had promised myself on that first day was no longer silent. The storm had finally broken. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The first indication I had that the legal strike had landed came not from my lawyer, but from a frantic, barely coherent voicemail from Amanda. Her voice, usually so controlled and sharp, was high-pitched with panic. "Helen, what have you done? What did you do? Our bank accounts are frozen, the credit cards aren't working, David's paycheck was deposited, and we can't access it. You have to call this off. This is insane. You're ruining our lives." There was no apology, no remorse, just pure, unadulterated rage that her personal cash machine had not only been shut down, but was now actively fighting back. I listened to the message twice, a grim satisfaction settling over me. I deleted it without a second thought. A few days later, a formal letter arrived from their newly hired lawyer, a man whose letterhead looked expensive, but whose arguments were weak. It was full of blustering threats and false accusations, claiming I had abandoned the property and was now engaged in a vindictive campaign of harassment. It accused me of elder financial abuse against them. The audacity was breathtaking. Miss Davis scoffed when I read it to her over the phone. "Standard tactics," she said, dismissively. "They're throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. Don't worry, we'll respond accordingly." Life settled into a new rhythm. I continued my volunteer work at the library, my yoga classes, my book club meetings. I was making friends, real friends, who liked me for who I was, not for what I could provide. Margaret and I fell into a comfortable routine, sharing meals, watching old movies, and taking long walks. I was starting to feel like myself again, or rather, a new version of myself I was growing to like. I found a small one-bedroom apartment for rent in a quiet complex near the library. It was a fraction of the size of my old house, but it was bright, clean, and entirely mine. The day I signed the lease, I felt a sense of ownership and independence I hadn't felt in years. With Margaret's help, I bought simple, inexpensive furniture. We spent a weekend painting the walls a cheerful shade of yellow. As I hung a few pictures on the wall, new ones of me and Margaret, of my new friends from the book club, I realized I hadn't thought about my old house in days. The pain of being evicted was being replaced by the quiet joy of building something new. My focus had shifted from what I had lost to what I was gaining. The legal battle dragged on in the background, a slow grinding process of motions and discovery. Miss Davis was a rock, handling everything with cool efficiency. Her strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. We weren't suing for emotional distress or trying to prove who was a better person. We were focusing on the cold, hard facts of the contracts. The life estate was breached. The private mortgage was in default. It was a simple matter of contract law, and they were unequivocally in the wrong. During the discovery process, the full extent of their financial recklessness came to light. They were drowning in debt. They had 2 car loans they could barely afford, thousands in credit card debt, and had taken out a second mortgage on the house, my house, that they had hidden from me. Tom's ledger of my gifts to them was cross-referenced with their bank statements, proving that my money had been used to fund a lifestyle of luxury while they neglected their basic financial responsibilities. They had likely planned to sell the house as soon as I was gone, to pay off their debts and start fresh, thinking the life estate clause was just a piece of paper they could ignore. They had underestimated me, and they had profoundly underestimated my husband. One evening, there was a knock on my apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole, and my stomach clenched. It was David, standing alone, looking haggard and lost. He looked older than his 35 years. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his shoulders were slumped in defeat. I hesitated. My first instinct was to keep the door locked. But looking at his pathetic figure, I saw not the man who had betrayed me, but the little boy in the photograph I still carried in my purse. With a deep sigh, I opened the door. "What do you want, David?" I asked, my voice flat. I didn't invite him in. He flinched at the coldness in my tone. "Mom," he started, his voice cracking. Can I please just talk to you for a minute?" He looked down at his shoes. "Amanda, she's left me. She packed her bags this morning. She said she couldn't handle the stress, the humiliation. She said this was all my fault for not being able to control my own mother." The words were meant to wound me, to guilt me, but they had the opposite effect. A dam of anger I didn't know I still had broke inside me. "Control me," I said, my voice rising. "You think this is about control, David? I gave you everything, not just money. I gave you my time, my love, my support. I gave you the house your father and I built from nothing, and you stood by, silently, while your wife, the woman you chose over me, threw me out onto the street, like a piece of trash. You didn't answer my text. You didn't call. You let me think for days that my own son had abandoned me, and now you come here to my home because she left you, not because you're sorry, but because your life has fallen apart, and you have nowhere else to go. Do you have any idea how pathetic that sounds?" He shrank back under the force of my words, tears welling in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. "I know I messed up. I was a coward. I was so afraid of losing her, I didn't realize I was losing you. By the time I understood what she'd really done, it was too late. I was ashamed to call you." "Yes, you were a coward," I said, the anger beginning to subside, replaced by a vast, weary sadness. "And you can't fix this with a 5-minute apology on my doorstep, David. You and Amanda made a choice. You chose a life built on my money and your lies. Now you have to live with the consequences." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a broken man, but his brokenness was not my responsibility to fix, not anymore. "Goodbye, David," I said, and I gently closed the door. The resolution came a few weeks later. With Amanda gone, and their finances in ruins, David had no fight left in him. His lawyer contacted Miss Davis and offered to settle. They couldn't pay the $275,000 they owed me, of course. The only significant asset they had was the house, so the settlement was simple. David would sign the house back over to me, free and clear. In return, I would forgive the private mortgage debt. He would have 30 days to vacate the property. I would not pursue any further financial claims against him. It wasn't a complete financial victory. I was, in effect, buying my own house back with the money they owed me, but it was a moral one. The house was mine again, unconditionally. The day David's 30 days were up, I drove over to the house. I had hired a cleaning crew and a locksmith. I stood on the sidewalk, just as I had on the day I was thrown out, and looked at it. It was just a house, a beautiful house, full of memories, but its power over me was broken. Winning it back felt less like a triumphant return, and more like the closing of a painful chapter. I walked through the empty rooms. David had taken his clothes and some personal items, but much of the furniture I had bought, was still there. The house felt cold, impersonal. All the warmth, all the love, had been stripped out of it. The ghost of Amanda's ambition and David's weakness lingered in the air. I knew then that I could never live here again. The wounds were too deep. The memories were tainted. The next day, I called a real estate agent, a friend of Margaret's. I told her I wanted to sell, and I wanted to sell it fast. "It's a beautiful home," the agent said, walking through it. "It'll sell in a heartbeat." She was right. Within a week, we had a cash offer from a young family with 2 small children. They had fallen in love with the big backyard and the quiet, tree-lined street. I accepted their offer without hesitation. A few weeks later, I sat in a sterile office and signed the closing papers. The proceeds from the sale, after taxes and fees, were wired into my bank account. It was a substantial sum, more than enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. I had my security back. I had my future back. I stayed in my little yellow apartment. I loved it there. It was my sanctuary, a place I had chosen and created for myself. I continued my work at the library, my yoga classes, my book club. My life was full and rich. It was quiet, but it was my own. I had lost a son, but I had gained myself. Sometimes, I wonder what happened to David. I never heard from him again. I hope he found his way, that he learned to stand on his own 2 feet, to be a man of integrity like his father. I hope he found some measure of peace. As for Amanda, I can only imagine she moved on to her next target, her next opportunity. But I no longer waste my energy thinking about them. My life is here, now, in this moment. I often sit on my small balcony in the evenings, with a cup of tea and a good book, watching the sunset. It's a different view from the one at my old house, but it's just as beautiful, and it's mine. The smile I wear these days is no longer a shield, it's genuine. I am a woman who was cast out, who lost everything she thought was important, but in losing it, I found something far more valuable, my own strength, my own worth, and my own happiness. And that is a foundation that no one can ever take away from me. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.